What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another one of my epic developer streams where I work on Xibalba, where I work on Cause Monarchy, and where I work on various other things that are components therein. Today we'll be taking a look at the Sycora tech map a little bit more, because I've got more things to plan for, and once I get a better idea of how these regencies will all play, it'll give me more equipment, more, shall we say, ammunition with which to design the campaigns and missions for them in a specific understanding of like how they operate in the early game. And if I'm trying to make a challenging Sycoran mission versus an easier Sycoran mission, I need to know what kinds of things the Regency is good at various stages of the game and where some of their weaknesses are, so I can design the maps with those in mind, right? So yeah, we're going to be first discussing all of that. Yes, the tree of tech must be watered with the tears of start@net. I do like the I was it's really funny you mentioned that, because earlier, I guess yesterday, I was reminded of the actual original quote that you're making fun of, Luciferius, which was obviously the is like the tree of liberty must be watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants, or something. Something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing it from memory. But the I was reminded of it, and I was trying to imagine how I could turn that epic quote into something epic that would still that wouldn't sound like I'm breaking the rules of the setting where there are no humans. So how are human idioms and quotes leaking into the writing? But so far, I just have not acknowledged those elements. What's up, Veek? Welcome. Earlier today, or actually another thing that happened yesterday that I almost said earlier today about, was I did some planning for the Ancifi tutorial, and specifically I went through and updated the documentation that I personally have, offline documentation, nothing on the website, where I discussed the plot, basically, of the tutorial. And this was secondary always to the core idea of designing a series of missions that would be playable from the perspective of a prospective player, a new player who had just shown up. But I still want to engage them with some sort of story, and I want to get that sort of buy-in. And the players who aren't interested, they'll always be able to skip the cutscenes, of course, and just jump straight in. And none of the cutscenes, critically, will have information that you can't, like mission critical in-game related information that you can't get more quickly by looking at like the intelligence reports or whatever at the beginning. And I suppose I should actually write some of that stuff down. So that might even be something that we do later on today. I think it probably will be. So we can say, oh, that's the wrong day. We can say, Xibalba stream. We'll say, I guess I should organize this a little bit more intelligently. So we should do this. And then we'll say, cut, I don't know how you would even say it, but I guess we could say like, ready room documentation. That's basically what I'm talking about there. Because I talked a little bit about this in a couple of other scattered places, but the idea is that when you're in the middle of a single player mission, for example, and you're about to deploy your forces, you actually do get to enter into the pre-building phase, deploy your forces, consult information about the level that you're going into, consult information about your opponents and stuff like that. So anything that is discussed in the introductory cutscene, you could say, the appropriate early stage cutscene, that you decide maybe you're not interested in the story, or you're replaying it or whatever, so you want to skip that, but you still want to know, like you want to reap the benefits that are related to in-game, like the information that's related to in-game, that should actually be available in a very easily digestible text format. Like I'm thinking something similar to the objective screen in the Brood War briefings, where it just gives you some key points, and then maybe some buttons that you can press for further reading if you want. Nova Covert Ops actually had elements of this where you could move through the map and then like move your mouse over certain things. But for the most part, it was just used for like lore Easter eggs and memes and stuff, instead of being massively useful. And obviously none of the gameplay required you to know any of that information anyway, because enemies just existed as obstacles in that game, or set pieces or whatever. So in this situation, when we're trying to warn players of proactive enemies that are actually trying to win their own victory conditions, satisfy their own victory conditions on the map, and don't just exist to be obstacles, we obviously need to, or we don't need to do anything related to pre-planning information, but I feel like it would behoove a military commander to be walking into a situation where they're fighting competent enemies and say, hey, actually, what we should be doing is studying up on them and giving getting ourselves a little bit of a leg up in terms of information, right? Knowledge is power in some of these circumstances. So I would like to encapsulate that in the ready room concept. So we'll probably touch on that a little bit later. So when we're looking at the concept of the Sycora specifically, I was thinking that it would be pretty sensible for us to try to finalize the tier 2 situation, which means finalizing, rounding out the reliquary roster. And then we can probably dip into the Testament and the Falsehood, so tier 3 Empath and Severed, and also maybe some of the infrastructure stuff. If we can just sort of flesh out the second and third tiers, we'll be in a pretty good position. What's up, Knight of the Realm? Welcome. I saw you posted another ArtStation link in your channel, so I'll take a look at that later. Later on. So, yeah, I think at this point we'll probably just try to come up with some more concepts for the structures that we already have. I was trying to think a little bit about setting the stage for a lot of the more advanced mechanics of any given Regency in infrastructure that is immobile without external assistance, like transports and stuff. So I'm thinking like the Sycora obviously have this sort of manipulation device. Like they have the ability to manipulate reality, and that comes in the form of terrain or accelerating projectiles or whatever the case may be there. So we might end up having some sort of situation where they get some sort of like hints of that power in essentially utility structures in the early stages of the game that also have their own place in scaling. Because something we haven't talked about too much, but something I do want to solve as far as like it's sort of a game design puzzle, if you will, is are there things about tier 1, 2, and so on, these early tiers, that should actually scale all the way up to tier 10? Like, are there things that are not going to have replacements, basically? And I think for stuff like the NCFI, the dispute, which is that thing that provides permanent tracking if you've tagged units with it. That's an example of a unit that will probably be pretty useful no matter what, and might not ever get a sequel, a successor. The little sort of voice in the back of my head that sometimes tells me about doubts that I might want to entertain, sort of warns me about like my sixth sense here is that the dispute is fragile enough as a unit in terms of its vitals with only 60 HP that it will probably just get destroyed by later game tech, and that would be how it loses relevance or significance. But assuming you can stealthily enough deploy it or protect it on the way with some sort of transport, it can be quite useful. And that's more or less what I was thinking, actually, is obviously behaviors will proc if you have a unit inside a garrison. So if you have a garrison and you happen to take that garrison and drive it through or fly it through enemy territory, and you're able to escape afterwards, during that time, the dispute would theoretically still be able to proc its passive and mark those units. So these are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. And I'm fairly certain that there will be ways to inadvertently use that. But on the subject of buildings, that's another sort of gray area right now. Because we haven't actually finished a draft of a complete tech tree yet. Obviously, the closest thing that we have is the NCFI. We don't really know what the end game tech of even one Regency really looks like yet. And we have some ideas for what it will look like for the other Regencies, like Sycora, for example. We know that they're going to be able to manipulate reality and terrain and unit positions and projectile speeds and other attributes. So there is definitely going to be some element of that at play. However, I do think that we probably want to come up with some various ideas for how the early stage tech, what, if any, early stage tech is going to continue to have relevance. And for the Sycora, that question is actually a little bit more complicated than it initially may seem, because, at least with the current plan, you actually have to produce the tier 1 tech structure in order to eventually get to the end game tier tech structure. Now, I don't even know if that's going to be the case, because the more I think about it, the more I think it maybe makes sense to have, you know, essentially two sections. So you build the tier 1 martyr production facility, that will get you the tier 2 one if you upgrade it. And then if you want a tier 4 martyr production facility, that would be you building a new structure from scratch, and then you can upgrade that to get access to tier 5 or whatever the case may be. That might make a bit more sense actually for general progression. So you only have to upgrade, once. You only have to sink, resources once, or maybe twice in some cases, before you're no longer able to continue upgrading a specific structure. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about that, but I feel like that could very well be something that would work. I think Lucifer is suggesting a bunch of different really crazy tech ideas. Wormhole generators are probably going to be Catethron. They're very built around singularities. Gravity manipulation, I guess in a way also blends with that. But it won't be just Cathethrons that have gravity stuff. They'll just be built around it more intensely. And planet busters aren't really the Sycora's specialty. They specialize in fast projectiles that don't really have a huge individual impact. So, like, their tier 5 unit might hit as hard if you just consider the individual attack without considering attack speed. Their tier 5 unit might hit about as hard as like a tier 2 unit of the Ancifi or something, which sounds pretty crazy. But if their tier 5 unit attacks 5 times as fast as a unit from tier 2 Ancifi, you can suddenly see how that actually is significantly more useful. So, we're obviously thinking about DPS as opposed to just damage of a single attack. But that's sort of the idea anyway. So yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this now and I'm thinking we already have a pretty strong base. We do need to figure out what the extents of their core elements of tech tree progression are going to look like. So will they have these sort of segmented progression things? We could do something similar to the Ancifi with how every other tier is a little bit easier to access, where we make it so that the intrusion is the initial pricey structure, and that can evolve into the Laybear, similar to how the Martyrium upgrades itself into the Reliquary, right? And then you build the, whatever the Arch Regrets tier 4 counterpart is as a separate structure. So we normalize that sort of every other sequence, if you will. We could do something like that, and that way it wouldn't, I mean, I guess it probably isn't that big of a deal now that I think about it if that ends up happening. However, the question does have to be asked about, like, does that make them too similar to some of the other regencies? And I don't really think it does, because the Ancifi have to build new unique structures for every tech tier, so they just, opt into... In fact... I wonder if, I guess you would have to upgrade your intrusion to a Laybear to unlock tier 4 tech structure, but it wouldn't be from the Laybear. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think honestly there's going to be a massive solution to, like, the concept of, so there's a core issue with, like, really large map sizes is obviously, like, getting your army reinforcements from, like, one location to another. And since we're going to be supporting, like, crazy numbers of players, there's going to be some pretty massive maps. And so I actually think that it's an elegant solution. The whole terrain platform idea is an elegant solution because of the fact that if you end up losing them on the front lines of a battle, and it's a big enough map, you actually have time to theoretically rebuild at least some sort of answering force, some force that will respond to the threat that's coming from your enemy, because the distance is so vast. So you're not completely counted out even when you lose your forward platforms. And obviously, until you lose your forward platforms, you can reinforce a lot easier than in some other RTS games. But it also doesn't go the whole, like, Command and Conquer 4 route where everything is a mobile production facility and it's basically a, what do you call it? It's basically a MOBA in a way. Or something where your construction vehicle is your champion / hero. So yeah, I think there's a lot that is resolved in that way. Yeah. Yeah, it might end up like structures that, or even spaceships or whatever, that are that large would probably end up being um so I think units will probably be controllable during their death sequences. It's just that very many, like the vast majority of units will have instant death sequences, so it won't matter. But if it's like a vehicle or a spacecraft, especially ones that are sizable, sizable enough, they're going to crash land if they're a spacecraft. And while they're crash landing, you'll be able to issue orders to them that would change essentially like where they're going to crash. So if you were concerned about like a structure um, or whatever, like if you were concerned about blocking the path because it creates debris, then you might like deliberately tell it to crash into a cliff or something instead of crashing, like just allowing it to crash on its own accord wherever it might be going, because it would probably just try to follow its previous order. If it was standing still, it would just like slowly descend into the ground, most likely, which probably looks a little bit goofy if you think about like how planes, for example, have to land on runways and stuff. But these are spacecraft, so I don't know that it matters as much. We can just sort of write that one out of our heads. The vehicle stuff would be like creating that sort of, like you're implying, like a corpse, like a debris field. And yeah, until that debris is cleared, which it would probably just be like targetable. Like all terrain would have some form of HP associated with it. It's just that, like for the most part, you're not going to reshape the terrain with conventional attacks. The debris would probably be reshapeable via conventional attacks, but I don't know how that would be implemented yet. That does sound like a nightmare to program. So I think we'll just have to explore those kinds of ideas. I'm typically not very much a fan of like debris being left behind with every vehicle. And so I think it would just be like corpses that are not interactable in any capacity. But like you walk over them, similar to how Brood War corpses work, right? I think that works way better from a zero clutter perspective, where you're trying to not fuck up pathfinding. But I do think that given the scale of some of the units we'll be showing off in this, it probably makes a lot of sense for, like when the pavilion gets destroyed, all of its cargo die because all of the cargo were inside a vehicle that's literally blowing up. But then you should still be able to, walk on top of it if it's supposed to be some sort of ramp or something. At least that would make sense to me. It wouldn't make that much sense if like the ramp just blows up immediately and like leaves nothing behind. So yeah. Well, there's no explicit unit size field, but I guess you're talking about like collision or dimensions or whatever. Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess it really depends on like if we even have that many explicit units that act as ramps. Because like I guess the Thruck will definitely do that, but they're one of the last regencies that we plan to add. And there was the idea of the tactical platform that would like land in order to provide um, passageway between certain bits of terrain. That was obviously from way back. If we go back to it's here, oh, it's probably not marked, I guess. If we go to the Brood War, Cosmonarchy Brood War page, this is, while it's landed, they can board the tactical platform and they can land on unbuildable and unwalkable terrain. While landed, the entirety of the platform can be traversed. So basically, I was imagining this like almost like a mobile thing of elevated catwalk from the space platform tile set that lands and then extends out ramps on all sides and allows you to board it and then also get off on the other side, just disembark in that sense. So that's definitely something I want to explore in the context of this game. But I'm not sure about what would happen if it was destroyed. Because maybe the most intuitive thing is actually to just make it blow up and not have it provide any benefit after it's been destroyed. I'm not 100% sure. So that might actually make the most sense. And then if it just happens to be sizable enough, it would leave behind debris that could then be cleared by, forcibly targeting it or something. But maybe, we'll experiment with what feels good. Like if the debris ends up causing more issues than it solves, or causing issues other than, resolving the intuitive aspect of like a giant thing just blew up. Why am I still able to just walk around? Um, you know, we'll probably just make it so that the corpses look less imposing. You know what I mean? The debris fields look less imposing, and then you can just walk through them entirely. That kind of approach is obviously incompatible with something that is like an FPS of some sort, though, because I mean it's not incompatible, but when you're dealing with an FPS, like you expect dynamic cover if a vehicle blows up in front of you. You don't expect to just be able to walk through it, or bullets fly through it or whatever. So we'll see how many of these ideas can actually be unified at some point. But that's a topic for another time entirely, isn't it? So when we're looking at something like this, something like the Sycora, I want to take another look at the Martyr branch. So if we assume that you have access to all 6 of the currently planned units at any given time, because you probably have some Martyriums and maybe 1 or 2 Reliquaries at tier 2, we also have to think about like what kinds of units would be the most usable. Obviously, the Exodo and the Ayada have been combined into the Ewanada, which is kind of an interesting concept. The Erodi is like a brand new thing, not really represented in any other capacity because it's a fighter. So this is a new unit as opposed to a unit that acts as a successor. The Odaira and the Anito are a little bit different. The Anito is like the closest the Martyrs have to some sort of AoE. Everything else is obviously not AoE. And then obviously there's the Odaira, which is just like a sort of artillery type unit. So I don't necessarily want to make successors to these 2 units in the additional units from the Reliquary. But I do want to have some aspect of like shoring up maybe some other aspect of like what the martyrial composition would look like. So if we look at the basic units, if we assume that the Exodo and the Ayada are represented with the Aranada at tier 2, and then we add the Erodi to the Odaira and the Anito, and we consider what we have access to something with a bounce attack. What's the range on this anyway? It's actually a pretty reasonable range. And then you have the Odaira, which is even higher range. Oh yeah, the Anito was originally supposed to be a tier 2 unit, so I should probably reduce the range on it now that I think about it. Or buff the range of the Odaira, one or the other, so that they're a little bit separate. And then you've got the Erodi, which is a bit more close range. It's got a laser beam. And then we've got the Emanada, which is the crazy unit that was somewhat controversial when I deployed it. I think that's mostly people using fridge logic because they haven't actually played around with it yet. But I, too, have not played around with it yet. So time will tell. I think the biggest thing that people are missing about the Ewanada is that it's not like this reveals the unit that you're attacking. So if you don't actually have active vision on it because you're too far away, you can't shoot it, obviously. So kind of a prank. But I don't feel like that should be explicitly stated because it's not like there was any implication that it reveals the target. All right, so let's jump into this. We'll jump down to the Odaira blaster and we'll give it 9 range because that's epic. What are the resources of the Odaira? I actually want to jump this up to 200 Magmite. That's my idea. It is pretty fragile, but I don't think that's that big of a deal. I suppose I could give it like 1 armor for the extra Magmite cost. And I think I will drop the Anita range to 6. Matches the Exodo then. Okay. Then we've got the Ewanada, which is also something that matches the Exodo. You basically won't be training Exodas if you can afford to train Aonadas instead. So I think something needs to be between the Avenata and the Erodi as far as resource accessibility goes. It can't be a long-range unit because the Odaira already covers that, and it probably shouldn't bother with crowd control because not only is that not the specialization of the Martyr branch in general, we already have a little bit of a flirt with that with the Anito. So we need something that's not just a standard fair unit, because that's what the Avenata slash Exoda slash Ayada are already taken care of. And we need something that's not a fighter, that's not a long-range unit, and is not a sort of slightly off-brand um, ranged unit. So we could have a closer ranged unit, I suppose. Because if you already have the Emanata, you're probably not bothering with Ayadas or Exodas, and Ayadas previously occupied the role of like the frontline fighter. So it's durable. So we could have a frontline, like maybe 3 range, even less than the Ayadas. So it's not like mutually exclusive, but would be harder for you to provide a compelling argument to use. Or it could be 5, I suppose, as a ground unit. We don't have any 5 ground units yet, 5 range ground units. So that tells me that the niche will probably be something on the more of a supportive side. Something that's either 5 or, well, so either 5 range or less than 4 range. Something on the supportive side. And something that is maybe like 100 Magmite and 100 Hypervials. Or 75 Hypervials or something in that range. And then I'm trying to think about like what the utility aspect of it would be, because it would have a middling attack of sorts that has to be in comparatively close range quarters in order to deal any sort of damage. Maybe because of the fact that it would be right in the middle of a bunch of other units, one of the advantages it could have is that on death it triggers shield recharges, and like has like a limited version of the current effect for the Archons when they die in Cosmonarchy Brood War, where it's called Astral Aegis and it regenerates 50 shields. Could be something like that, where it creates like a field on death that regenerates shields. We could say regenerates shields and energy, causes active regeneration of shields and energy at 5 times the normal rate, and the field lasts only maybe 5 seconds or something, right? So if you stay in it the whole time, you would get, because I want to look at the base shield regen, 1 per second. So you get 5 per second if you were. So I think the regeneration rate for energy is the same. So we could actually make it so that units inside the field actively regenerate 10 shields, and so it would be 50 shields and energy over 5 seconds, which would be 10 times the amount. So that could be the passive, and then we could have the weapon be sort of like secondary. However, if it's meant to be a martyrial, like sacrificial unit, then I probably don't want it to be 75 Hypervials. I probably want it to be closer to 50, or maybe even cheaper than that, because of the fact that it's meant to be like, maybe this is a Magmite only unit because of the fact that it's meant to be sacrificed. Sort of like how vassals were built around the idea of being sacrificed. That's why you got 2 of them. That's why they were only minerals. Thinking obviously of Cosmonarchy Brood War when I say vassals. So this unit probably should be not incredibly dangerous by itself, but you'll still want to. You might even want to try to like kill units other than it before you kill it. Or you'll just have to accept bursting them down. It's almost like, in that sense, this kind of unit almost acts as an anti-crowd control unit, conceptually. Because if you get hit with a bunch of AoE, you yourself could just kill that martyr and pop the active regeneration, which is kind of an interesting concept now that I think about it. So if we're doing something like that, then now we can start talking, actually. Now we can start slapping that in. Archons heal, they were originally not supposed to, and then because of some bug, they only healed other units instead of the player's units, because like we somehow got the player check inverted when we changed a bunch of helpers, I think. And then as a result of that, I was like, well, just whatever, keep it. It's fine if it's just an AoE thing. I don't think it actually makes them bad against other Protoss because they're still very, very strong. The question is, if you like, they then become very different when you're using them against Protoss because you can focus the Archon down to get shields yourself. If shields were used in more places than just Protoss, that would obviously provide different things. Also, if they also regenerated energy, which is what this unit is going to do with its field, then there's another usage regardless of whether or not you have shields. The other thing here is that it can't I don't want it to anything that refers to shields probably needs to regenerate shields no matter what the shield kind, like the shield type is. So it would have to regenerate like the Keltar shield, and it would have to provide the like basically any unit that has a sort of shield should probably benefit from it. Either that or every regency specific shield mechanic should only apply to that regency's shield, which feels more closed off in terms of design. And not in a way that is particularly beneficial, I think. So, yeah, not sure about that one. This is not the right one. Do this. We can close that for now. Well, if you don't go melee heavy and you're building a ton of grand libraries, I don't really know what you're doing. Like at least I would say at least 40% of your army should be melee or short range if you're going Grand Library Gateway. That's the entire focus of the Templar branch. It has a great synergy with the what do you call it? The rogue gallery units as well. Obviously, Excitralisk's benefit, Aspirant's benefit, Empress's benefit, and then you Strigas as well. Strigas are great with Archons because of the fact that they're the whole melee / short range combined with the repulsion and stuff. In fact, if you go Striga Archon, you can probably repulse enemies out of the healing zone, even if they are Protoss. So that's pretty neat, I think. But yeah, I mean, obviously there's. I'm not saying it's I'm not saying it's not worse against Protoss, but I think the whole idea of them being like quote unquote pretty bad, I think that would be an overestimation of how negative the impact actually is, considering the range of the benefit is quite low. And it's not like Protoss themselves have a ton of debuffs, so you're not cleansing anything if you do restore somebody's shields to full. That would be related to you. It's definitely not as like if you removed the enemy interaction, it would be a better unit in terms of efficiency, but then it would also be a less interesting unit in terms of the benefit you get. And I'd probably have to balance that out by not healing as much, which doesn't really make sense for a tier 3 unit. So I think the biggest issue is that it interacts with systems that are limited mostly to one race. And if you were to expand what it actually interacts with as opposed to reducing what it interacts with, you would actually get a more engaging experience, I think, with using that unit and like having counterplay and stuff. Because right now there is counterplay to using Archons, running into them, which causes them to deal damage to you. And that counterplay only exists if you're Protoss or have shielded units. Obviously, the other races have very limited access to shielded units. I would like it if it were more general purpose. Maybe it should just heal HP if they're like, if there's no shields or something like that. That obviously fucks with the identity of the unit as a shield ball. So I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. But again, I think the energy one is a simple enough thing that would benefit from it. Is like 50 shields and 50 energy. Why not? Their entire ball of energy identity would be reinforced by that. It still wouldn't really solve the issue because energy having units are pretty infrequent as well. And the ones that are going to be on the front lines, even so. But it would add another source of counterplay, positioning your army to be close to the danger of the Archon and then benefiting from its death. So, yeah. I think the main complaint right now is just that it interacts with less things than it could, and that maybe it ought to if it's going to be at the current stat that it's at. As a fair critique. So now I should go ahead and grab the Anito and grab my man. We got you. Oh, carry. Let's be tier 2, suborder 1. I'll find the Erodi and set it to suborder 2. This is made by the Reliquary. This is a carry blaster. So I guess it should actually be suborder 0. And the Avanada should be suborder 1. And do this. The Anito has speed 3, by the way. That seems like a prank. I think it's because I had planned to make the base speed 3.5 or something, but the Maverick speed is 4 in the current implementation of Terran and Cosmonic Brood War, and that looks like a pretty reasonable base speed. At some point, I'll have to revise all the unit speeds again. We'll get there, though. All right, then we need to jump into the Reliquary. Oh, I have to pick a frame for this guy, too. Yeah, you're definitely not paying for this guy for the combat prowess, so I gotta be careful about the cost. I would imagine the rate would just be the inverse of standard regeneration instead of it being anything crazy. That way it's consistent with the system that we already have. It just happens to be inverted because it's over. The trouble is figuring out a way to decide, um, like, I don't actually have any gating uh, for things like the Katoros shield regeneration. It's just like a cleric from Cosmonarchy Brood War where there's no energy. I don't have any way to gate just supercharging a single unit. So we would either have to have a cap, which would have to just be maybe like 40 energy or 40 shields beyond, which would be weird and not really what I would want to do. Or I would then need to go and find a way to limit the capacity for every shield healer to exist. And in my opinion, that just doesn't really feel reasonable. So resources are instantly deducted when you order a unit and it starts being produced or added to a structure queue. And the same is true for when you queue a structure via some builder of some sort. If you cancel the order, the resources are refunded before training begins. Before construction begins, the resources are refunded in full. If you cancel a unit that's in production, the same thing will happen. There will be no penalty for canceling a unit that's halfway trained, even though I guess that would make logical sense, but I don't really want to do that for gameplay reasons. And then if you cancel a structure, I think we probably will. Maybe not for, I don't know. I haven't really spent too much time thinking about canceling resource and how many resources you should get for canceling something. Like, obviously, Brood War had that weird mechanic where if you blew up a structure that was researching an upgrade, the owner would only be refunded 75%, I think it was, of the upgrade cost because they didn't cancel it, which is really insane to me. We don't have upgrades, so we don't have to worry about this. But the question of, like, if you actively cancel something, should you ever get a resource penalty? And that does happen in Brood War, if you like start a structure as any race and then cancel it. I don't know. I think if you cancel it yourself, you'll get in Brood War you get a partial refund. I don't know that canceling should ever be something that you like. The player choosing to cancel and pivot. I don't know if that's reasonable to deduct some form of the resources to tax the return. If the structure is destroyed by another player before it finishes, you don't get anything. So I kind of like that better, mostly because I'm very averse to percentages. I don't know what you're talking about, Vig. That sounds insane. I don't think there's ever a point where you would lose money from canceling. That's my current position. I can't really see a justifiable reason. Like, there's certain cases where it's obviously like, oh, I made a mechanical error by moving my mouse too far to the right. And in that sense, I think it's already punishing enough that you have to cancel it and then redo it because it's like an APM tax. But in cases where you're canceling a structure to avoid, like, because it's under attack, or because you, like, scouted something and then want to pivot, is that really something that should be justified? Because, like, there's already an implicit, well, that really is explicit, but there's already a cost insofar as you have to then spend APM reordering something more accurate. I'm not 100% convinced that you need added punishment on top of that. I'm obviously not shying away from punishing players for bad play, but I don't really see why the APM tax and the attention tax is not sufficient. So, since I already have this built-in aversion to fractions, I would prefer to actually just have the 100% refund, make it all or nothing, And then because of that position, when we're operating from the principle of there being no fractions, or at best having like a 50% return or something, because that's a little bit easier to justify. But even then, you'll get some weird fractional numbers. Then you have to decide when does it make sense to not allow the player to have a refund and give them nothing. And I can't really make a compelling argument in my head for why I would ever feel it would be appropriate to punish a player, not just myself, but any player, based on them building something that they then want to cancel. You could make it so that if there's a connected, so you could make it so that the cancel always comes from the builder instead of the structure. So obviously in Brood War, we can load this up as an example. Obviously, if I take a mason here and I build something, if I cancel here, nothing happens, and I can resume building. So maybe what should happen here is that I can pause construction or I can cancel construction, but it has to come from the builder and it can't come from the structure itself. That I actually could see an argument for. And that would basically mean that if you snipe the worker, they can't cancel, and there's some counterplay. That is something that we would have to think about, obviously. It still won't apply to all regencies the same way that you might be thinking, though, because some regencies build from their main town center in some other base, so they will always have access to being able to cancel the structure. And blowing up the town center would also cancel the structure because you're killing the worker. So it would really only apply to like worker-based construction, external worker construction. That mechanic would only ever apply to external worker construction, which is like, I don't even know how many. It's probably like 3 or something. If I go to Xibalba and I search external construction, single worker external construction, team worker external construction, multi-worker external construction, which should be team. Yeah, so that's Encifi, that's Embrasit, and that's Makral Das. That's it. So there's 3 regencies that have access to that. I'm not 100% convinced that that needs to be the case. Okay, here we go. So we'll say there's multi-worker, which needs to be changed to... Oh, no, it is actually multi-worker, so I was thinking of team worker needs to be changed to multi-worker. Just wanted to make that consistent. So yeah, I can't really see an argument for doing something like that, personally. I mean, I can see the argument. It makes it interesting for engaging with that particular regency, but it also feels more like a gimmick, where only one regency is affected. I suppose if every structure can pause construction to do something else and then resume, and must resume in order to finish the construction, it's actually not a gimmick. It's just that the odds of you being able to interact with the system are pretty slim, and some workers will build the structure from inside it, which means that, yeah, they can also pause, but they're not in any danger of being destroyed, if you know what I mean. Abuse gimmicks when spamming buildings to block expansions. Canceling and rebuilding as the building is almost killed by the blocked player. Well, if you try to build on terrain that's been occupied by an enemy unit, you obviously won't be able to. If canceling had a delay, I think that would just introduce sluggishness to the controls. So I'm not really crazy about that idea. We could try it. Brood War has a grid, you just can't see it. So I assume that's what you mean. Like it has a build grid. I think the offset to cursor thing is probably the most ridiculous aspect. But I'm pretty sure you said you fixed that in Cosmonic Brood War, so that's a change we didn't even note down. Yeah, so Milestone, if you can elaborate on what you mean, I haven't actually seen that exact thing happen in StarCraft 2, so I don't know about it. I know Terrans will sometimes start building stuff and then stop, and that's a lot more annoying to do as the person who's trying to do that in Brood War. Oh, you're talking about that. Yeah, I know it. I know why the delay was proposed. I just mean that the sluggishness in the control system seems pretty uninteresting. Okay, it was improved. Yeah, so warping structures into block expansions is something that will probably be leveraged in Cosmonarchy as well, but I don't really think that that's a huge issue because so in Brood War, the solution to this problem was just expanding somewhere else. In StarCraft 2, if you expanded somewhere else, you would just get annihilated because of the game design and the map design, mostly the game design. In Brood War, you could just expand to your third instead. And the idea of like your opponent trying to block multiple expansions and successfully being able to do that when they've got to also manage their own base was pretty slim. Like you have to be a fucking god to do that. Good luck actually pulling that one off. So in Brood War, you would just take your third because the odds of them being able to actually do anything to you are pretty slim, and then you would take your natural later on afterwards. At least this is obviously as Zerg specifically. I don't know what the other regencies or other races would do in Brood War, but I don't think this ever happened to other regencies, other races in Brood War. If you think about like trying to do that against Protoss, they just like send one zealot at, and you have to run away because you'll lose. And as Terran, you'll obviously have Marines or something, or maybe a Vulture, in which case they just die. So the only reason why it was happening to Zerg at all is because early on Zerg wanted to expand before they get any military. So you would destroy them with a worker, but that wouldn't really result in a huge loss because they would just expand somewhere else. In StarCraft 2, the game design was completely different, so this was just like a habit all the time. Yeah, yeah. I don't think that there's going to be too many cases where you can move structures that early unless you're a specific regency like the Thruck, in which case it's probably going to be really fucking slow. But Knight of the Realm, the player is not owed an instant refund. They're owed an instant issuing of like response when they issue an order, and really you have to justify why you should delay an action. The only justification is the enemy can do something, but the enemy's already doing something and you're already losing something when you have to cancel a structure. You lose tempo. That structure may have been 50% complete and taken 75 seconds. Like there's a million cases where you're already losing a bunch of shit. I don't think you need to get the instant cancel on. I don't think you need to sacrifice the instant cancel in order to punish the player. They're going to get punished anyway. That was the whole reason why I said they should just be refunded the full amount. Now that's an interesting question. Because again, I don't really like fractions, so starting at like 10% max health or whatever is kind of lame. But there's absolutely no opportunity to cancel if you start getting attacked when you set up construction. I think that's actually fine though, because if you consider the idea that like you're trying to build on the front lines, this turns it. This is all great if we say like, oh, defender's advantage. You should be able to build with like 10% max life to start out with, so you can get sniped down immediately unless it's a exhaustive effort by the opponent. However, what if I start building a command center or a barracks or a bunker at the enemy and they start out with 10% of their life or whatever the floor is? Suddenly it becomes a little bit different when you're talking about the aggressor getting this benefit, right? So I think it's probably more sane if we just have that on all sides, personally. I am right there with you, homie. I also cannot wait for the testing phase to begin. It will be very, as the kids say, epic. And by kids, I of course mean myself. Because no kid ever says epic, but I do. Yeah, probably by the end of this month. I mean, that's the plan for the demo anyway. All right, let's take a look at our unit and make sure we actually implemented it correctly. We shuffled a bunch of other stuff as well. Ah, I didn't even title the unit correctly. Well, we fell apart at the first hurdle. Been getting recommended more and more 3D modeling guides lately, so that's cool. I figured out that if I just here we go. I actually feel like maybe this should be like a craft instead, and I should pick a different frame. I'll pick the Clarion. Where's McClarion at? But yeah, I figured out that if I just sit here and watch like a tutorial or whatever, I'm instantly more interested in actually, like, I'm interested and more motivated to actually follow through and make something in Blender, and that's been my way of cheating, if you will. It's not really a cheat, but I at least like learn more things, so I think it's fine. Oh, that's the wrong regency. There you go. And I already used the Clarion for the Tylar, but whatever. There you go. I still remember there was like a point where Folka posted in some channel on the server, "You might find this humorous, but do you think Simulacra need a buff?" Like, I did find that humorous, man. I will admit that was quite the haha. Considering it was him who was like complaining the most. What the fuck? In the end, it will just be balancing, bug fixing, and asset creation. Yeah, probably. You're probably right about that. And campaign design. I have to write my own blog about 5 principles for level design. Where's my martyrium or reliquary or whatever? There, close it. I didn't even add it. Right. So I think that's probably sufficient. You can jump into the Testament and come up with another unit for the empath. Yeah, well, we're well on track there. Just need a more involved editor, AI, pathfinding, you know. Well, the campaign design stuff will be like at least the planning and stuff will be done, I'm sure, at least in some capacity or another. But I won't be able to actually start on the final drafts of any of the missions until we get the art in. Oh yeah, that reminds me. I have to write down something for me to do later. What was the thing I was supposed to do later? Oh yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, yeah, way more manageable. And remember that because of the nature of the game having upstarts, regencies as upstarts, the Rosellium and the Orlithrae, who are coming in the first expansion, will be their tiers 1 through 3, or at least 1 through 2, will already be done, at least in a first draft, and then they will be, updated and finalized or whatever later on, and when they get the full, complete thing. So we have to do 6 regencies, and then like 0.4 or 0.2 regencies or something like 6.2 or whatever the number is to get the upstarts counted, and then so then it's like our work is already started for we've already started on it. It's not a blank canvas for the expansions, and then we also do the same process for whoever's coming next. So off the top of my head, I know Solar Throne is coming next. And I guess it would be Oros. I think it's Oros and the Solar Throne are coming in the second expansion. Let me just go and confirm that was the original plan. Yes, that was Technocracy. And then obviously Rune and Gedimemter from Biologic. Heat Deathless is still probably the most epic fucking name possible for an expansion pack. And then the others are a little bit more. They're a little bit more tame. I do like Endless Earth, but Heat Deathless is like that's Pog Champion actually. So let's do the same thing that we just did to the Martyr to the Empath. We took a look at their branch and determined that they needed a unit that was sort of mid-range and more utilitarian in nature. The Empath branch has a ton of more stuff on the utility side, so it doesn't need any of that. But it could use an agile frontliner or an agile heavy hitter. I still think the center needs some sort of stat changes or something before it's ready to actually do anything useful. So the Cortalis is kind of the mainstay for the Empath branch, while the Tennyson is a bit more on the side of being like, you could say, standard fare, if you will. We'll probably drop the hypervile cost off of the Tenaton at some point, at least to start us off with. Oh no, the Cortalis is the one that's like Magmite only, so maybe that's actually fine. So we need something that would be a de facto upgrade over the Tenaton, then. That's my thought process, anyway. The Yinian is, like, interesting, useful or whatever. And the Tylar is obviously very useful, but they're both more geared towards, like, utility and shield restoration and stuff. So much so that they might even overlap a little bit too much, and maybe the Tylar moves up to another tier, becomes like a more epic concept. So we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, obviously. If we jump into the Testament and we add another entry for our third unit, I'm thinking that what we would want to do here is, again, have some sort of sequel to the Tennyson IMO. So that means that we need to open up the Tennyson, and we need to set its successor field. And then we can copy this, make a new unit page, and clear out the name sections. Say heavy empath infantry. And this will be the same speed. We'll crank the Magmite cost and especially the Hypervile cost. And we'll set the time slightly higher as well. Set this predecessor. Sycora the Testament, and this is obviously Teneton, and then we'll set this, and that, and that, and let's do its vital. Oh, let's set tier 2, of course. Let's open up Yin and set that suborder to 1, and Tylar to 2. And then we'll jump into here, and we'll give it 9 sight range, not 89, 80 shields, 45 HP, and 1 armor. We'll jump this down to 75 as a result of the armor increase. And then we'll give it 3 weight. And should be good there. So now we just need a name and obviously its weapon. We obviously don't have like a new icon for it or anything. Oh, that's fine. Oh, I did forget to set it to the correct tier, however. Prank. 3. All right. Easy, boys. We already did the high concept shit. We don't need any more of that for this brand. We set our sights upon the severed. Let's break down their units here, because some of these might actually get shuffled down depending on what the actual combat sort of composition, the unit composition would look like. We have the Encompassing Blaster, which is crowd control, decent armor pen. 7 range is pretty noteworthy. And this is a minor unit. It's a hovercraft of some sort, probably, or maybe a walker. The Akoron is a hover unit. When I said hover unit before about the Ithon, I was mostly thinking about the like a unit that actually does hover visibly or whatever, but I didn't mean to add more confusion. The Akoron is mostly like attacks as many targets as it can, but not massively beneficial. The Ectrol's frontliner, and the Olatir is a another unique way to provide multi-hit gameplay. We can do something a little bit more straightforward with just a straight up multi-attack unit, and maybe this could be an infantry unit There's technically 2 infantry already, but there's technically 1 infantry unit already, but it's going to be a, what would you call it? It's going to be a melee unit. So I'm not really worried about overlapping there in terms of infantry. I am a touch worried about figuring out how the fuck to represent their infantry, but that is something else entirely. Suppose we can use the 75 for that one. So let me grab the Ithon, or Ethon. Haven't decided how I want to pronounce it yet. Add another unit here. This is this. Created by falsehood. Had to remember it. The other question is, like, if this unit is... we know this is going to be a multi-attack unit. Does it also need to be a unit that fires while moving? And then it could just be maybe a slower moving unit? Because the speed is not like the Schism or the Severed tech map, or branch. That is not... Speed is not their strong suit, right? So we actually could make this like a, a 2.75 or a 2.5 or something for speed, and then, keep its turn rate lower than the others. And then, like, obviously we would probably want to pump up the Magmite cost to like maybe 250 with the 50 hyper vials, and then set it to time 25. And because this is tier 3, like, I'm not really feeling too bad about, like, maybe even the hyper vials go higher than that. But this can be like a 75-50 with 2 armor, 10 sight, 4 weight, maybe even higher later on. Who knows? And then we jump to the abilities. This would be Sycora. Or no, this would be common. Fire while moving, and common multi-attack. I guess it would be 2. It would just fire at 1 additional target. And then maybe it also, in addition to firing at 1 additional target, it has crowd control, like AoE. That could be kind of interesting. I think the way that multi-attack units will actually work is that if they are within range of a target that you select, and they're already targeting 1 unit, basically, like, they'll have like a target queue internally where, say you target, you walk a unit into an area, and you just order him to attack move. He automatically acquires 1 target, and then automatically acquires a 2nd target. When you then explicitly order him to target something else, the first target would be lost, because, like, that's the least recent. So it would always try to preserve the least recent target. But if you ordered 2 different targets to be attacked, and it was within range, it would clear both of the other targets, if that makes any sense. So we basically have like an order that is preserved. That way, if you have a multi-attack unit that can attack 2 targets, and you already are attacking like 2, or I guess 1 target, and you order it to attack another target, it would still attack the previous target that it had, because that would be the previous one that it acquired. That's probably the most intuitive way to implement that, like, as far as interactions between the player and multi-attack units. So that's my thought process anyway. We also have to decide, like, is this going to be a successor to some other unit? And if that's going to be the case, then maybe we could do something like... There's a moth on my sound absorption panel. What the fuck? So if this is going to be a successor to a unit, it's probably going to be a successor to the Ithon. Ithon. So that's fine. We'll just do predecessor, Sycora, Ithon. And here we'll do successor, Sycora, Oh, we haven't named it. Oh, no, I did name it. I just didn't rename it. Evranus. which means I need to open up the falsehood and add Varanus to the create section. Yes, it was used a long time ago because when we first put the website together, we had Science Facility unlocking certain spells from like the Science Vessel and stuff. It was uniquely a Terran mechanic, and then it was later removed just for consistency's sake. It was at least an upgrade in the sense that you had consistency with, like, you had to unlock something and it was an alienable advantage. But I've deemed it too annoying to have to wonder, like, oh, I see a science vessel, a Seraph. Do they have a science facility? Because that will change whether or not I can actually, expect irradiate. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. See ya, nerd. So I says to the kid. Cops are coming. They found Andrea Rose's blog posts. Again. Oh, that's really psychotic that I just looked at my fucking Discord messages and found that after saying that. Oh, this is heavy. No, we'll say versatile severed infantry. And then we were going to use, I think, like icon 67, 75. And then the blaster is coming. Varanus blaster .yml. Oh, did I accidentally click on Ethon blaster? Holy shit, that was pure incident. That's insane. Could be kind of neat if he can only attack ground units, but I think the Ethon attacks air units. We'll set this guy's range lower. We'll say 1. Mm, 0.9. Okay. Brutalized. Well, I guess you might not be familiar with his work in Age of Empires, but there's a mission that at one point, don't know if it still works this way, but for a long time, you were defeated if an eagle flew over your hero in a microsection. So basically, bye. You want to talk about wave emojis? Like, that sounds like something that would make sense in a comedy project, but I don't think he's made any of those before. There you go. 3 new units in one stream. Can you believe it? If we really wanted to go full man mode here, we would come up with 2 new units to round out the falsehood, and then maybe we turn our attention to some base infrastructure stuff. Oh yeah, that's kind of something that I was going off on a tangent about, and then never sort of capstoned. But the idea of like some units that the unveil does this sort of shielded allies within 8 range of the unveil have their shield regeneration rate boosted by 4 per second. So it brings it up to 5. This is still passive. And so you would probably drop this next to like some supportive stuff. Oh yeah, and that reminds me. If I'm gonna go the route of like Martyrium on builds Reliquary, Intrusion builds Laybear. If I'm gonna like copy that mechanic, then I need to lower the cost of the Intrusion to compensate for the fact that you're. I might want to do that anyway because you don't actually have a defensive tower until tier 2, or maybe I just move the missive up, but don't know. I like the burden. I know that there's a structure that I wanted to like cloak other structures, so that could be like a tier 3 defense or utility structure of some sort. Let me actually open up the concept for that. If I go to Sycora, there was a concept for utility structure that cloaks idle units and structures after 2 seconds of no activity, which would include moving. Actively healed 20 shields per second while under this effect. So I don't know about the heals 20 shields per second. It might actually heal HP instead, which would be pretty like much more useful for like all regencies. Okay, so yeah, I do like that from a conceptual standpoint. Excuse me. Oh, I suppose that I should decide whether or not Missive should have... I guess no, I don't want Missive to have Observance because of this ability, actually. So we'll say... Sycora, Labyrinth... passive. Yes, that is the case. The Waylay will be... I mean... So the Hotshot, or the Mason or whatever, will stand taller than the Waylay, but it won't be like by so much that it'll be shocking or whatever. It'll be like the difference between a 6-foot person and like maybe a 5'8" person or something like that. You know, like, well, I guess that's literally 4 inches, but you know what I mean? Like, It would be something similar to that. It wouldn't be massive in terms of height differences because the armor would provide some, like the boots or whatever, would provide some sort of boost in that sense. But yeah. What do we got here? After 2 seconds of inactivity, I guess we'll say labyrinths, disguise, yeah, cloak nearby units and structures after 2 seconds of being idle. While cloaked by this effect, affected units have gain there you go. Yeah, don't worry too much about it. I mean, the details can still be useful because we are eventually going to have all of these, like, or maybe not all of these units, but a good portion of these units will be, like a non-trivial number of the units will be showcased in cutscenes. And if we're going to have them, be they in-game cutscenes or like full-blown CGI trailer stuff, having access to more high-detailed art, even if it doesn't make it to the in-game sprite, would still be useful. But for now, you can do the sort of like low-resolution pass, if you will, and not worry too much about details. Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Now I have to go into the Itera and add labyrinth. Okay, cool, yeah. The scale without at least one native unit in the game is pretty tough. Yeah, you're right. DF said that he'll be back on the Macrolon Light Mech sometime soon, and that will be like 1.5x the height of the NCFI Hotshot or something like that. So that'll be a nice like frame of reference. And then obviously if like the Waylay is 0.9 or 0.8 the height of the Hotshot, then you could sort of do the math based on that. But obviously the more we fill in and the more units we add, like the easier will be to start imagining that, and like the more natural it will feel to work within the space. So I think that makes a lot of sense anyway. Let's go to the manifest. That's not the manifest. Here's the manifest. And then let's find the lay bear and say that it's built by the intrusion, and that the intrusion is something that creates lay bear. And there you go. Get add, get commit, and change tack, get push. Yeah, we had the whole exchange on the server earlier, Veek. It's probably beyond any assistance, man. But you never know. I mean, stranger things have happened. Okay. There we go. So, I do like that utility structure. We can remove that from the ideas here. I think the sequel to the Olatier would probably have an aura of projectile changing. We could probably do a utility unit for the Severed, actually, as their next unit. Oh, well, I kind of said that in jest, but yeah, I mean, obviously, like the buried within the videos that I'm doing for the mapping guides, obviously include a bunch of my own ideas. The Brood War video that I'm working on is like it's multi-purpose. There's the takedown of the community, like the not really the community because there's more than one, I guess. But it's like it's a detailed explanation of what everybody gets wrong. It's an exploration of what makes Cosmonarchy a step in the right direction, and maybe hopefully I can find some other projects because I talk about this, or I plan to talk about this in the video itself. But it's very uncomfortable when you have to use your own work as an example of something that is like the one and true path, so to speak. Obviously, that's like a little bit bombastic. It's probably not how I'll phrase it in the actual video. But I basically have to front load the section where I talk about the path to improvement and like ways you can error correct by talking about how I recognize that it's kind of uncomfortable for me to be talking about my own project in this way. And I'll probably like front load it with some of the flaws that I see in it and make it obvious that I'm not just here to shill my project, but it comes from a place of actually trying to improve the level of discourse and understanding overall. And that part is definitely rooted in education. There's also going to be a takedown of Blizzard's style of RTS design in StarCraft 1 and an explanation about that. And that's going to be very educational. Without being like something that's attacking like an individual person or could be perceived as an attack against an individual person. So there, like the whole thing is educational in my mind, but there are parts that are more geared towards analyzing community content, and those are like the mids. You could say like from minute 15 to minute probably like to the first hour or maybe longer, maybe an hour and a half, like 15 to an hour and a half. That'll be about the time frame where I'm dealing with that. There's the lardism, like look, this is what Blizzard did, and here's how similar it is to everything that I just complained about and analyzed and broke down and critiqued. And that section will probably be about a half an hour, maybe less. Maybe I can mince my words because I've already done that so much. Haven't written that yet. I've written a little bit of it. I haven't written all of it yet. And then there's the better path thing. That'll probably be 15, 20 minutes minimum. And then there's a wrap up. And so the opening 15 minutes are, well, the opening 10 minutes are the intro and history of the scene and state of the scene. And then there's a 5-minute sort of interlude where I'm talking about some of the higher profile individuals who are more prolific in terms of their impact on the community and why I find their conduct questionable and problematic, we'll say. And that doesn't take very long, but that's basically just me explaining my positions and sort of shedding some light on who these people are and what their motivations are or what their points of view are. And then I go into the actual projects themselves, and that's what takes the most time, I think. Armies of Exego do some of that. In terms of like being better than Blizzard, the campaign was a disaster for sure. I mean, it has micro missions, it has like a pre-placed hordes, it has cheating AI that are spawning in like 2 units at a time and stuff from their production facilities. It's like, you know how we have resource multipliers for our AI in Cosmonarchy Brood War. They had unit multipliers where they were just training 2 units for every unit that they actually trained in the harder difficulties of that campaign. So no, in terms of single player content, they didn't do really anything. Their game was more interesting than StarCraft, but like that's just assessing the base quality. Obviously, StarCraft has a much higher ceiling in terms of like if you took Armies of Exego and made levels as good as they could be with that game state, and you compared that to levels as good as you could get with Brood War's limitations, you would be dealing with like obviously StarCraft would be way better in that sense. But Armies of Exego did do some things right. Like obviously the idea that we have that was spooky. I don't know why my mouse did that. The idea that we have the like selecting units that have selecting structures that have been queued but not started yet, and adding them to control groups and giving them queued orders and stuff. That's taken from Armies of Exego. It's actually taking it a step further than what they did, and that's just because I felt like it was a very natural thing to be able to do. And that's one of the few optimizations anybody's ever made to the control scheme of Brood War without like sacrificing something else. Yeah, I haven't actually. I played one or two skirmish games during my when I last had it installed. Although I don't think I ever actually uninstalled it. It's probably still running on my other hard drive. It's runnable, I should say. Okay. So yeah, unfortunately, there's not really anything that I can point to and say like this is clearly better. I suppose if I was a bit more familiar with like Mental Omega, I might be able to mention something about how they have like this multiplayer focus, and that necessarily makes them design new tech trees and stuff um, in order to better improve like the multiplayer gameplay. But I know that the campaigns for that game or that expansion or whatever that fan made project, the campaigns for that are fucking abysmal. So like infinitely more toxic in some cases than something that Blizzard would make. Um, it's like if you. It's basically like Flame Knives all over again in terms of how unreasonable it is. I'll put it to you that way. So sadly, I can't like even give a cautious like blanket recommendation for that one and say like, yeah, I haven't played it, but they seem to be doing the right thing. I can, maybe they might get like some sort of mention on this, but this is very much like specific to Brood War, I think. I will take a short break to get some water and use the bathroom. And when I return, the plan is to pivot away from this and go into the some planning of the mechanics that I mentioned earlier in the sketchpad here. So we've done that basically, and we'll jump into some documentation about some other things, and I will get your guys' opinions on those if you're still around when I return. So stay tuned and don't die. Yeah, BRB. Yo, time to get jiggy with it. I think I could still say that without getting destroyed. Okay, if we jump into the Cosmonarchy section, there is indeed a control scheme area where we've previously discussed things like orders. We talked about game flow. So I suppose we could talk about... I don't know if it works in game flow. It could probably work as a separate section, maybe beneath control scheme or something, where we do... And then we'll call this... I don't know actually know what we would call it is the trouble. I guess it can just be a separate section called Ready Room. And I guess I can add in a little note here. Begins in a pre-building phase that takes place in the player's so we'll say in the ready room. So we'll say a pre-game. We'll just call it a viewport for now. I was thinking of calling it a menu, but that is disingenuous since you can like look through the entire map and stuff. So I think that makes sense. We'll go ahead and grab this paragraph and jump it into here. I think I have this open somewhere still. This is immersive. This is, here it is. This is the control scheme one. So we'll add that there. And then we'll add the section for the ready room. So this would be... oh, this is actually not the same thing. This is not the same section. Though I suppose it could technically be put into the control scheme section. But for now, we won't be doing that. Me too, homie. Welcome back. Now that I've formatted this, jump back over here. So we know that the ready room works in such a way that it allows you to select starting locations if available. It allows you to design your starting base based on your starting resource count. I suppose there could be like a recommended option as well. So here's what we know, right? We'll just do a very loosely organized list. So we know that there's going to be begin by selecting a starting location from a list of available ones. If only one is available, it will be locked as the player's selection. And then we know that we're going to have the next spend your starting resources on your ideal your ideal initial units and structures. If you do not have any starting resources, you will default to, let's say, if you do not have any starting resources and there are no pre-placed forces, you'll default to, well, I guess this would just be like, if specified by the map designer, the map author, players will begin with default melee, I guess we could say skirmish, retinue, for so we could say their regencies, default skirmish retinue. And then we would have the game mode is competitive. I don't know. I guess we'll say we can also say map authors can also specify a recommended starting set, which can be defaulted to by and then customized by players. So this hopefully paints a pretty accurate picture of what it would be looking like. And then we would do, once all human players have configured their starting locations, starting sets are used by AI players. Once all human players have configured their starting locations and retinues, the game will begin. I guess we could say a 5-second countdown timer will initiate, after which the game will begin in full. So hopefully this makes sense for the ready room, and we can also mention human players spend starting resources on their ideal initial units and structures. Desired initial units and structures. So, human players begin a game of Cosmos Monarchy by selecting a starting location from a list of available ones. If only one location is available, it will be locked as the player selection. For a given player, locked as that player selection. Then we also had the idea for intelligence and like mission reports and stuff. If applicable, introductory cinematics will begin playing when a map is initiated. These can always be skipped, which sends the player to the ready room. Then we have, also we would have, if applicable, players may consult, so we'll say mission objectives and other key information is summarized in the ready room. If applicable, players may consult intelligence. We'll say may consult mission reports that that can be customized by the map author. We'll say map authors. So this is if supplied, if available. And then this could say, yeah, if applicable is probably fine there. So now we got a little bit of an understanding of what the fuck is going on here with these ready rooms. So here we have games of Cosmonarchy. I will say as described in the game flow section. Matches of Cosmonarchy begin with a pre-building, a pre-game phase where players configure their starting locations and retinues. In immersive and custom scenarios, introductory cinematics are commonplace and begin playing when a map is initialized. These cutscenes are always skippable, and in the event that all players choose to skip them, all human players, well, I guess we could just say all players, the ready room, the players enter their respective ready rooms. So, yeah, I mean, I already wrote out, like, what I'm going to write out here. I just wrote out in a summary format. Active ready rooms. So this is already taken care of. So we'll say after there should be cinematics, not cutscenes. Ends or is skipped. Players enter their respective ready rooms and begin the preparation phase. Critical, we'll say mission critical information is displayed in the ready room, including mission objectives, key map features, and known enemy compositions. So this would also include like upstarts and stuff. I don't need to write that down, but figured I would mention that here as I'm writing it. Mission critical information is displayed in the ready room, including mission objectives, key map features, and known enemy compositions. Players can also consult prepared intelligence reports based on if they are supplied by the map author. The first step of planning that players engage with is selecting their desired starting location, though there are many cases where I guess we would say though starting locations, though this feature, this choice may have been made for a player, if it is locked in the scenario's settings or configuration. After starting locations have been chosen by all human players, the next phase of preparation begins, where an initial retinue of units and structures are requisitioned with each player's starting resources. In some cases, a default configuration is provided, which can be selected and modified at a player's leisure, if desired. These default configurations will generally be used by AI players. Depending on the scenario's settings and the game mode, players may begin the match with their Regency's default skirmish retinue, instead of being able to design their own. I'm actually not sure about this last one because I guess we could say instead, depending on the scenario settings and game mode, players may have their starting retinue specified for them. So we could say, as with starting locations, players may have their initial retinue specified for them, depending on the map settings and game mode. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to throw in here was, obviously, so this is... yeah, okay, that makes more sense. Once all human players have configured their starting locations and retinues, a 5-second countdown timer will initiate, after which the game mode will begin in full. I guess we could do something like this. Let's plop this on the website and see what it looks like. also see if I made any typos. It doesn't look like it. It's because I'm epic. Yeah, it also depends on like how many starting resources are available. I think Melee will probably have that be a lobby option, basically, is like you can specify how many starting resources. So skirmishes, custom skirmish games will have that as like a customizable template or whatever, where you can choose how many of each resource you have access to at the beginning of the game. Excuse me. And then I think we would experiment with different like ladder options well before launch and figure out like what feels the best from a skirmish point of view. It might even be fluid, where the map size dictates how many resources you have at the beginning. I don't know. But I have a feeling we could come up with something that's consistent for ladder, for ranked play, and that same. One thing that really irritates me is when you've got a game where the competitive ladder operates on a different rule set than an unranked version of the competitive ladder, where it's not ranked, but it's also not like using the same game mode. Obviously, Counter-Strike is like the most notable example where this is the case. They added this like scrimmage mode that it doesn't affect your rank, I think, but it's not very well used. So like it's not very widely used, I should say. So just add this note here because I was looking for a way to explain that one. Ready runs. No, I wasn't talking about the paid thing. I was talking about the fact that, like, for a long time, you actually didn't have the... basically, like... Yeah, basically. The unranked mode and the casual mode are like completely different. So the competitive rule set and the casual rule set are completely different, and that's what really irritates me. So we would definitely have ranked ladder, unranked ladder, and then custom. And custom wouldn't really be ladder. You wouldn't have matchmaking for custom games. We might have matchmaking for cooperative games, but you would also be able to make like custom lobbies of like your own cooperative scenario or something. Well, the trouble is that Counter-Strike is also just too long, isn't it? So it's hard to know what to do about that one. Oh, the TOC didn't get changed. There you go. I guess we should probably BR here. Yeah, and it would probably give you a sort of like number of players in this queue thing. But yeah. Well, no, I think instead of queuing for any map, it makes more sense to just make a lobby, the way that like old Brood War did it. I guess technically the remaster probably does it the same way. StarCraft 2 had this whack system where for a long time you didn't even have lobbies and you had to like manually invite people. So you couldn't like the lobby system is even still now a fucking disaster. But at launch, it was even worse, if you can imagine, because you basically did have that queue system, but like there was no way to like chat with people who were waiting for more people to fill in, and there was no way for somebody to know that people were actively queuing for a specific map, or see like which maps were obviously being queued in, you know, like currently being queued in. So it's just a mess. Lobby being the default is good, and you would just make it so that the I think it's cool to have that like looking for game thing that CS:GO added a while ago, like probably 2 years ago now. They added this thing where you could advertise yourself as looking for a game, and so you would basically specify which game mode you wanted to do, and that would, I guess, in our parlance, we would call that like creating a lobby for a queue that other people who are also looking for game can see and then thus join. So they'd be able to see your profile, see that you're like you're a certain rank and you're trying to you've already specified you want a certain set of regencies like enabled or whatever, and they can see like which maps you've selected and they can join. And then maybe like, I don't know, there would be something like that where you could basically create like a lobby for the queue that you're trying to go into. And so that way you could do something like a 2v2 or 3v3 matchmaking, and you just turn on that switch after configuring the lobby your way and see what people want to join. And obviously, if you don't get that many people, then you start looking for other people's lobbies to join up, you know. But you could imagine that being pretty useful as like a social feature that actually does encourage like play and stuff. So IMO could be pretty useful. All right, there you go. That's much better, I think. All right, so yeah, I've documented the ready rooms. I will post this in the Cosmonarchy section. Documented ready rooms and how the pre-game phase is set to work, how to function. How would we name our ranks? That is a question. I think the ranks are obviously like Monarch would probably be the highest rank. And then you could have like various ranks for like Despot might be like the first one or something, and then like Tyrant could be in the middle, and then Autocrat and you know, stuff like that. We could use like names for rulers, like different names for rulers. Obviously, Upstart could be like the unranked one or something, just as like a subtle diss, like, man, the Upstart's more competitive than you. Just like laughing at people. So that's definitely a possibility. So yeah, I'm thinking that we would want Monarch to be like the final rank, basically. And Upstart would be a really low one. So we could do something like, if we go to, I guess this could be thrown in here as like an ideas section or whatever. All these ideas. Ranking. We'll say ranks. So this would be just making some space here. So we'd say Monarch, Upstart. I feel like Autocrat being a pretty high up there is fine, although we might change that one. Yeah, I don't know. These are the ones that come to mind anyway. Maybe Crony, or is it Crony with a Y? It is Crony with a Y, okay. Crony's a good word. Should use that somewhere. All right. So yeah, something like this, maybe. Crown Chaser. All right. I think that'll probably do it for my stream. I can sense my hesitance to keep going, mostly because I'm actually not really sure what I want to do next. I know I want to do some immersive planning, but I'm not doing that on stream, silly boys. At least not yet. Maybe I'll show off the initiation of the Sycora tech map stuff. So I guess we can figure out what we're doing for the next stream in 2 days. So obviously we are doing a Xibalba stream, and we will want to do a few things. So we can say, I'm not sure if we want to do any more Sycora tech map. I'll probably do some Sycora tech map tomorrow. So we'll say Xibalba recording. Sycora tech map. And this will be severed branch, 2 new units. I guess we'll say severed branch, infrastructure, buildings. And here we have, we also want, I guess we could say Sycora tutorial planning? Or not tutorial, campaign planning. Then we had on the stream in 2 days, we could probably do Keltar tech map. Initialization. So that could be a thing. That could probably take us all day, actually. So yeah. I think that'll probably be what we do in 2 days. So I will see y'all for doing top 1% of players, the Storm. I still like that that's like an actual unit. And it's going to be a pretty epic unit. Not like tier 5. Or wait, it might actually be tier 5. I don't remember where it was. Oh yes, tier 3. Of course, because it has to be 3. But you know, this will be a unit that's actually used, you know? So I'm a fan. Anyway. Could you imagine, like... I'm waiting for the think pieces, man. I'm waiting for those. So yeah, we've definitely done some progress. Join us tomorrow on Veek's channel for some streams, a stream, where we work on that. With any luck, I'll actually be present, and I'll be able to work on some ports of the Protoss. And we'll just keep chugging away at that. Obviously, the previous stream he did was all about like abilities and training. So by the end of next stream, the goal is to finish training, implement some more stuff related to abilities, and maybe something else. And that'll be what he's working on, and I will be working on the unit ports for Tier 2 Protoss. Don't know how far I'll get there, but you know, I'll probably chip away at like maybe the Clarion today or something, for example. I think we'll do that. I think we'll do that. Tell me that. And yeah, thanks for joining. Bye-bye.